Hey guys, what's going on? It's Coach Jess, and today we are going to discuss how to use gaps in the stock market. So I get this question asked so many times where people get intimidated by all the gaps that they see and they just want to know, how do they work? How do I chart them? What is my method? So I'm going to quickly show you what I do with gaps so that hopefully this will help you with your trading. Let's get to it. Now, when I draw gaps, I basically draw them from wick to wick. And I start with the candle that created the gap, and then basically the candle that opened right after the gap occurred. So it usually happens on the next day. And I like to include the wick. If there is not a wick and it's just a body, then I will do the body. But essentially, I'm just documenting the space that is created between price action. Now, when I am utilizing these gaps, I treat them as really strong areas of supply and demand. So pretty much what's happening here is if I see that the market stays on top of this gap, I'll be looking for calls. And if it's below the gap, I'll be looking for puts. Now, there is market structure that occurs inside gaps like this, so you want to be very careful. And a lot of stock option traders like to trade gap fills, meaning that they pretty much assume, and they know from experience, that the market likes to come back and fill the gap, which I'll show you an example, but it likes to come back and fill the gap and then either continue going up or it'll change direction and reverse. So this is one example of how I draw a gap. So let me delete this real quick. And then you can see here where we have another gap right here, okay? So we have a gap. This is where I like to close. This is the candle where it finished off, right? So it's a candle that started the gap. And then this is the candle right here that basically not closed it, but it completed the process of the gap, I should say. So here's where it started and here's where the gap completed. Now we have a gap in the market. So what typically happens here is the market will either, like example, come down, retest, and continue to shoot down, or it will fill the gap, which it did with another gap, but normally it'll fill it with bodies of the candle. So you'll see, like, for example, it'll gap down and then candles will fill that gap. And what will happen from here is the market will either continue to push down like this, or it will actually reverse and now turn this resistance into a support and start pushing up. So let me give you some more examples. Again, we have a gap right here. Some people like to draw a box in the gap. I don't draw boxes just because if I'm drawing a box on a higher time frame, as I go down to smaller time frames, it's just too much. It's too cloudy, and there's market structure that happens within that gap. Now, I don't trade inside of gaps. So like, for example, this huge gap that was created, some people will trade the fill of the gap, which is cool. It's a great strategy. And if I have proper confirmation, I probably would. But for the most part, I like to see how the market reacts either on top of the gap or the bottom of the gap. Nothing wrong with trading gap fills. I have done this myself, but I do believe it takes a little bit more of an advanced trader to understand how that works, because majority of the time it could be just a pullback or a retracement. All right, so here's another one right here, okay? So again, you can, if you wanted to, you can box this like this, and as long as the market stays underneath it, you know that you're going for sells. If the market comes back and pulls back into this gap, you have to see if it's going to show rejection with price action and continue to shoot down. In this case, this just continued to go down, which was a really good sign. Like I said, there's strong levels of supply and demand. Here's another one, and I'm just showing with a box. So do you see we have this space right here in between these candles? You can draw it with a box if visually that works for you. Now you can do it from, again, the candle that created the gap and the candle that completed the gap. So I do it just from, in this case, the body to wick. And I'm just going to zoom in right here. You can, if you like, you can include the wick in the close of the candle, and that is completely up to you. If you want to do that, there is nothing wrong with that. There really is no like set way. It's just a matter of identifying the space that has occurred with price action and watching how the market reacts to it. So you can see here, like I told you before, in this case, the market did not fill the gap. To fill the gap, the body of the candle has to close that gap. So none of the bodies of the candle closed this gap. So in this case, it retested under and shot down to this previous support. We then got a retest underneath again, shot back down to the support area, gave us a nicer retest back to this price action right here. Candles gave us confirmation, and we then shot back down. So this was a gap retest. Now let me see if I can find a gap fill, because I actually, yeah, here we go right here. So here you go right here. There is a gap. Okay. Again, you can draw a box if you like. If you think that's easier for you, draw a box and just drag it to the right. That's it. Now, you don't want to solely just use this strategy. You want to make sure that you are aware of market structure and how to identify entries as well, because that's going to add additional confluence to your trading and give you a higher probability setup. Like the more confirmations you have, the better that is for you. All right, so I like to draw a line. So for example, I'm drawing a line at the wick of this candle right here. And then let me just clone this real quick. And then I'm going to do it at the candle that created the gap right here. Okay, now it again doesn't matter if you want to do the wick or if you want to do the body. It is completely up to you on what you want to do. Just make sure that it makes sense. So here you can see where the market essentially gapped down, gave us a little bitty retest. It didn't go perfectly to the level, and it's not always going to do that. And then it shot right back down to previous structure, this really strong support. Well, if we continue to look up, this candle finally filled the gap. So it closed the gap, okay? When that happens, we usually will get a change in the trend, or it's just a deeper retracement for a continuation in the trend. So you can see where we were pretty much overall bearish with this market. And as we got close to this gap, the market closed within the gap. So the gap has now been sealed and it retested. Okay, so my white candles are my bullish candles and my black candles are my bearish candles. So you can see where we retested right here. And during that process, it actually also created another gap. Okay, so not only did it respect the gap that it recently created, but it also closed the gap from July 7th. And it didn't close it until a week later. So gaps don't always get filled right away. Sometimes they can take a week later, they can take months. It really just depends, y'all. But then you see that, and we finally had a break of our structure right here. And we didn't get an overall change in trend, but the market did come back, and retest this area right around here. Okay, so you can see where it was just a nice big retracement. So when you're looking at your gaps, just decide if you prefer to draw them with lines, if you prefer to draw them with boxes. It's totally up to you, but I'm going to go over this one more time. If the market is moving from the upside, okay, if it's moving from the upside, let's say it gaps up. So pretend this is a gap. If it retests the top of your gap, I look for price action as an additional confirmation and market structure. If I see that it's showing rejection, I will look for a continuation up. Now, the markets can also gap up and then come back down and fill the gap. From there, you have to be very careful, because the deeper the retracement into the gap or the closing of the gap, there could be a sign of a reversal. So when that does happen, you want to be very careful and make sure price action is showing rejection if you're going to take it back up. When this happens, for me personally, I like to see it come back on top of the gap, and then I'll take it back up. But if price action is really strong and giving me like a really strong indication that it's going to push up, then I'll consider taking it from there. Now, again, if it gaps up and it comes all the way down, you have to make sure you have your price action confirmation, because it could do this and come right back down and retest the bottom of the gap to change direction or make a deeper retracement from the higher time frame. So go ahead and practice your gaps and back test this. Go back, keep checking to see, how did the market react to the gap? How long did it take for it to fill the gap? Does it fill gaps right away? For example, you guys can see this really big gap right here. This gap was, let's see, it occurred on May 24th, and it essentially filled on May 31st. So it filled about a week after, and the gap has been filled. That's it. The gap is done. Then you have a new gap right here, you guys. Okay, so you can do just the complete space, And if I drag this all the way to the right, let's see if it ever filled. Let's see. All right, so there you go, literally. So look at that, you guys. The gap just filled, and that gap that we found was back in June 9th. So it took literally months for it to fill this gap. So just understand that it can take time or it can happen right away, depending on your time frames. Obviously, when you go down to smaller time frames, you might get smaller gaps in there that get filled right away, but just backtest this and this will be very helpful to you. If you do want to learn more and you really like what I'm providing here, number one, hit that like button, subscribe, share this with your friends. And I do have classes that I do offer. I would love to make you one of my students and see your progress and just help you on your trading journey. So do not hesitate to reach out. And I hope this video helped you guys. Have a wonderful day.